Hello everyone, welcome back to First Line Therapy. We're now in our third week of the program. I'm really excited that you guys have decided to join today. I know there's some new folks there that I haven't got to meet yet. I look forward to meeting you soon. I hope that everybody had a really good week this past week. Hope you took home some of those essentials of why you're doing what you're doing now. I hope that everybody set a goal for this week. I hope everybody was able to achieve their goal for this week. So today what we're going to do is talk about supermarket shopping, trying to be savvy in the grocery store for eating well and eating good nutrition. And I hope that you guys will choose another goal this week to work on. And then at the end of this talk, I look forward to talking with you all on the phone for a Q&A session. So please make a note of any questions you think of while I'm talking. Maybe it was something you're trying to make work on your nutrition plan. You're not quite sure how to make that work for you. Maybe it's something related to what I'm talking about today. So anything at all, there's no bad question. You guys think of all the questions that you'd like to talk about at the end of this presentation today. So what we're going to do is dive right into talking about supermarket shopping. So just some general tips for supermarket shopping. We're going to talk about developing a plan of attack. It's always good to make a list. How many times have you guys, I know I've done it, I go into the grocery store. If I don't make a list, I go up and down every aisle and I'm just throwing things into my cart that just seem good to me, and then I get home and later in the week I didn't have the things I needed to make a complete meal, or I have some things that are way too easily accessible to me that I shouldn't really be munching on. So always better to make a list if you can, instead of going in without a plan. So develop a plan, avoid particular aisles. So for me, that's the potato chip aisle. I can't go down the salty snack aisle in the grocery store because I know there's nothing down that aisle that's on my nutrition plan. So I just can't go down that aisle altogether. For you guys, it may be something else. But, avoid aisles that there's nothing on your nutrition plan down that aisle. Check labels. A lot of questions I get come from folks that are saying, hey, is this something I should eat? What food category would this count as? Flip that food over, look at your nutrition label, and just take a look at how many grams of fat does it have? Are those fats good fats or bad fats? How many grams of protein does it have? How many grams of carbohydrates do they have? Are the carbohydrates from fiber? Are they from sugars? So just, do a little self-study on nutrition labels. So if a food item should get to count as a protein, or maybe it gets to count as a carbohydrate source, but a healthy carbohydrate source, or maybe sometimes by nutrition label reading, we find out that there's some sugar hiding in a lot of foods. So just flip that over and read your labels. And the other one, I don't know if any of you shop with young children. Keep your children busy, give them activity, because you might be fighting them on taking home some things that maybe you shouldn't. So bear that in mind too. So as far as developing your plan of attack, we want you guys to plan a menu. The resource book that I gave for the whole group to use has a section in about menu planning. It's a good idea to plan what you want to eat for the week and then make your list based off those items. Another thing is not going to the grocery store hungry, because if you go to the grocery store hungry, you definitely are going to be adding foods in there that aren't great for you and probably overestimating what you need to take home. So try to avoid going there hungry. Everything. So with planning your menus, know what you're going to eat for the week. And think about, this is the number of dinners I need. Maybe a couple of those dinners I might eat a same thing, but those days separated out. Really just look at the kind of meals you can make to kind of fit your nutrition plan and write all those out. This presentation that they have is recognizing to just look in the book, look for meal suggestions in the cookbook. We also left a cookbook with you guys, some tools maybe to expand your horizons on what recipes you can make to fit your nutrition plans. Definitely use that as a resource. Don't forget about healthy snacks. So I know one thing we've talked about is how much food there is on your nutrition plans. One way to get all of that stuff in is by using snacks in between meals. Um, that's one way that I, in particular, can get my veggies in. So when you're thinking about what you need to shop for, make sure you include items that you can eat as snacks, like a handful of grape tomatoes, or maybe pre-chop up some celery or carrots for the week that you can use as a snack. So don't leave those out of your plan. So try to keep your menu simple. That's really easy. Don't overcomplicate it and get overwhelmed, or, if you are tired and maybe you don't want to cook a very complicated meal, it's better just to keep things simple if you want. Keep your recipes really easy to prepare. That's going to make it much more likely that you stick to your plan. Make a list, of course. I know we're talking about the same thing over and over, but list out everything you need. One thing that helps is to break up your list into the different food groups, or where they're going to be located in the grocery store. So you make your general list of everything that you're going to need from the grocery store, but then you might, write out everything that you're going to get from the produce section, and then everything you might need to get from the refrigerated section or freezer section, or from the meats department. So separate it by group to make your shopping a little bit simpler. So this is, again, they're just sharing with you examples of how to list those things out. List it by food groups, vegetables and fruits, then your meats, and then like your dried goods, any of your dairy that you need to pick up. That can really expedite your shopping you need to, and have more opportunities to pick up things you might not need. So again, this learn the store layout slide, that's kind of what they're talking about. This helps to make your shopping trip faster. It's going to keep you from impulse buying. If you're not searching the aisles for foods, then you're less likely to pick up processed foods that we really want to try to avoid. And it'll keep you really consistent. So this next slide that's titled Common Store Layout, this is a really good visual representation of kind of the general healthiness of foods in a grocery store. I don't know if you guys have color copies or black and white copies, but in a color copy, there's a bar that goes along the outside. So that's representing the perimeter of the store. The perimeter of the store usually has foods like produce section, dairy, meats, maybe some freezer foods that might include some frozen vegetables. We like to use the idea of shopping the perimeter of the store. That's where your fresher foods are going to be. That's where a lot fewer processed foods are going to be. That section is highlighted in green. So usually that's a great place for you to shop if you get most of the things in your cart from that perimeter of the store. The aisles in the middle are yellow. Yellow means that you might find some healthy stuff in there, like you might find your dried goods, like you might find your beans, rices, maybe some canned veggies, items like that you'll find in there. But you also have to be, careful of the processed foods that you might find in those center aisles. And then, of course, these little stations by the cash register, those are red. You're usually very hard pressed to find something good for you to eat at the front of the store. That's usually your no-no foods up there. So when you're looking at foods, and specifically meats, when you're choosing meats to eat, look for ones that are lean cuts of beef, pork, or lamb. What you can actually do with ground beef, if you don't have available to you a really lean ground beef, like a 93% or 96% ground beef, you can go ahead and cook a slightly less lean ground beef, but then you can just rinse it in a colander under the sink to rinse some of that fat off after you've cooked it. And then if you feel like that's weird, you're going to put water in your ground beef, that's not going to taste any good, you just toss it right back into the pan after you've rinsed it and just, steam off and cook off any water that might remain, and you'll be just fine there. So that's kind of an alternative you can use to buying a really lean cut of beef for ground beef. One thing that you might opt for is trying to use ground turkey instead of ground beef. That's a tool to get a little bit leaner cut of meat, like in spaghetti or in, whatever you guys like to use ground beef for. Items that have less saturated fats in them. This loin, leg, round, those are usually signal words that there's a relatively higher fat content. So this loin, leg, round, that might have a little more fat. So when you're looking at grades of meat, you're going to look for words like good or select. Those are going to contain the least amount of fat for that cut of meat. Then slightly higher fat will be like choice. And then prime is, of course, going to be the highest fat. Prime is in it'll taste the best, maybe, if you cook it right, but probably has more saturated fat than we need. So one way, like if you grill meats and you find that, now that I've chosen a leaner meat and I'm grilling, it just doesn't taste as good. Well, you might consider using a different method of cooking them. So like moist cooking methods, like baking them, like maybe searing it in a pan and keeping the lid on some of the time, just to keep that moisture in the meat, make you feel less deprived of all those fats that you're used to getting to eat, and, cuts of meat that are less lean. So buy well-trimmed meat, or you can buy meat and trim it yourself, trim off some of the fat, look at the percentage of. So shopping for seafoods, seafood in general is usually pretty low fat. There's not a lot of bad seafood options that I'm thinking of. Now I'm talking about the meat. I'm not talking necessarily about how it's prepared, but seafood of its own is usually very lean. So that's any kind of fishes, cod, halibut, whitefish, flounder, snapper, trout, catfish. All these fishes are usually pretty lean compared to other cuts of meat, and shellfish is the same. It does have some cholesterol in it, but, it's not going to be as bad as your fatty red meats. And y'all know those are your best options because they have those good healthy fats in them, not just low in bad fat. They're high in those good healthy fats that we need. So when you're buying seafood, of course, if you're buying fresh, use it in a couple days. One thing that's a good option to do is to buy frozen. I think most people will probably buy frozen unless you live on the coast. I buy frozen. Just look at the quality of it, when you're buying salmon, look at the quality, see if you can reach for things that are like, wild caught, those types of things. So just check your quality, but frozen is definitely a great option. So one note kind of on reading labels. Reading nutrition labels is really tricky. It is very hard. It takes a lot of practice to get good at reading labels. One thing when I do this program, I'll encourage folks to bring foods in if you're having a hard time interpreting the nutrition label, and I can kind of help you learn how to read a nutrition label. One thing you guys might consider if y'all are having a difficult time reading a specific nutrition label, you guys can maybe snap a picture of the nutrition label and send it to me, and then at our Q&A session I can walk you through what it means. So that's something that works well in other groups. People will be like, I think I can have this as my protein source, but, help me interpret this nutrition label. So that's an excellent way to learn how to read nutrition labels on your own. So one of the first things you're going to look at the nutrition label, and you guys can go ahead and look at the actual nutrition label that's included in your handout. One thing you're going to look for to start is the serving size. So when you look at the serving size, sometimes they'll be sneaky and you think a food is packaged to eat all the food inside at one time, but it might say serving size is 1 and the servings per package might be 2. So it might really mean that these nutrition facts are for only half the pack because really there's 2 servings in this package. So be careful of that. You might look at a nutrition label and be like, oh, this looks so great. But then you check the servings per package and it's like 2 or 3 servings per package, which means you'd have to multiply those nutrition label calories and grams of foods by 2 or 3 for the whole package. So just bear your serving size in mind. Look at your calories per serving. So that's usually one of the next things you'll see is how many calories are in a serving. And then you're going to look at the amount of key nutrients. There's 3 macronutrients. When we're talking about macronutrients are measured in grams versus micronutrients, which are measured in milligrams or micrograms, significantly smaller quantities. The macronutrients are just 3. Those are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Those are usually the 3 things you're going to check first on a label. So what you're going to do is look at the fat, might be listed first. Total grams of fat, so it'll say, like your example says, total fat 7 grams. Then usually it'll break it down into saturated or unsaturated fats, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated. Saturated fats are the ones we're trying to avoid. So if it says, for example, total fat 7 grams, and then beneath that it said saturated fat is 5 of those 7 grams, that's a lot of saturated fat. So that would be something to avoid. The next macronutrient you might see on there is your carbohydrates, and it'll say total carbohydrates in grams. And carbohydrates can be good for us or they can be not so good for us. Good carbohydrates for us are fiber. Fiber is going to be in those whole grains. Fiber found in fruits and vegetables. Those are good carbohydrates. So when the carbohydrates are broken down into fiber or sugars, for example, this total carbohydrates in this label is 34 grams, but of those 34 grams, only 1 is fiber, 17 are sugar. So that's not a good sign either. Then you can look at your proteins. So this one has 3 grams of protein. So protein, it just depends on what you're eating. If you're wanting to eat something as one of your protein sources, usually look for 12 grams or higher of protein. If it has less than 12 grams, you're not going to use it as one of your servings of protein. You know, that might work out to be something else on your nutrition plan besides a protein. But that's kind of a good number to look at to see if something can count as a protein serving or not. So then it's going to list all your vitamins and some of your minerals in there. You see vitamin A, iron, niacin, phosphorus, vitamin C, all those are your micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. And then you're going to look at these ingredients list. So usually when we look at ingredients list, the fewer the better. That means there's less processed foods and there's fewer chemicals in there. So if you're choosing between 2 options and one has a much shorter ingredients list, that usually means it's going to be freer of chemicals, things that might be toxins to us, processed chemicals for processing, that kind of thing. So the fewer the better is usually good. And another interesting thing about ingredients lists is food manufacturers are required to list the most abundant ingredient first, and then it moves down in its abundance. So, for example, in this food, we're looking at the ingredients list. The first ingredient is brown sugar cinnamon filling, of which brown sugar is your first ingredient. So that means that is the most abundant food product that's in this food. Then it goes to enriched wheat flour, then oil, then sugar, then corn syrup, which is a different form of sugar, then some water, then some dextrose, which is another form of sugar, then a little salt, then high fructose corn syrup, which is more sugar. So in your top 6 or 7 ingredients, going from the highest content to the lowest content and the ingredients list, we've got 4 or 5 of them are sugar sources. That's why there's 17 grams of sugar. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at ingredients list. A lot of times health foods are advertised like this cracker is made from peas. And then you'll flip it over, look at the ingredients list, and the first listed is enriched wheat flour, which means it's mostly flour. It's not really made mostly from peas. Your third or fourth ingredient might say pea flour, but just be wary of those claims. And you have the power to know what's in food and how much of it by looking at that ingredients list. So something else I'd like to point out here on this label is calories per gram. This is something I don't think folks generally know about nutrition, but a gram of food is usually equivalent to a certain number of calories. Calories is just a unit of measurement for energy in our body. So our bodies use energy, our bodies break down calories, and those calories can either be used up by our bodies, or if we have too many calories to use up, it gets stored. And that will become stored calories, stored energy, which is fat. So calories is just a unit of measurement for energies for our body. So a gram of a carbohydrate is going to be equal to 4. A gram of a protein is going to be equal to 4 calories. But a gram of fat, healthy or not, is going to be equal to 9 calories. So just bear in mind that even if it's a healthy fat or a bad fat, it's still going to be about double or more the amount of energy it turns into our body per gram. So fat counts for a lot. So think about your serving sizes of fat. For example, nuts. Nuts is a food that's commonly overeaten. Even though nuts are good, healthy fats, you really need to check your serving size, making sure you're eating your serving size, because that gets out of hand really fast because they can equal so many calories. Peanut butter and peanut butter and 2 tablespoons is usually a serving. 190 calories. That's like 200 calories in just a couple tablespoons, and it's because of the fat. Fat grams are about 9 calories in a gram versus 4 calories for a protein or a carbohydrate. So I just want you guys to take away knowledge from that. I don't want you to think that we condone a low-fat diet. We do want you to have a low-saturated fat diet, but we want you to have good, healthy amounts of good fats. So please let me know if that was unclear. I know that was a lot of information to throw at you at one time. So please let me know in the Q&A session if I need to expand on that anymore. Again, that's usually in cups and ounces and grams. Sometimes if you guys are cooking at home and trying to watch your serving size, you can buy a cheap food scale at a lot of places if you're needing to measure foods in grams or anything. But most of the time on a label it'll tell you, about how much of ounces or how much in a cup is a certain serving of food. Of course, I talked about the servings per container already. Make sure you check on that. So this is, explaining more about the fats that I talked about already that you'll see on the nutrition label. Fats is going to tell you what the grams of fat are. Then it should break it down into saturated or unsaturated. With unsaturated fats, sometimes you'll see them written as polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, As long as it says unsaturated, then you're okay. Just avoid saturated fats. So be aware of hidden fats in foods. You might find that in the ingredients list listed as shortening, lard, palm oil. Hydrogenated oils are saturated with a hydrogen atom. They're saturated fats. Watch out for those. So this is outlining where we found fats in this ingredients list. Hydrogenated soybean, the most abundant ingredient. Partially hydrogenated soybean oil. Those are two types of fats in there, both of which are saturated. Sugars. I gotta tell you guys, sugars hide. If you start picking up and looking at nutrition labels at a lot of different kinds of food, you'll find there is sugar in so many things that don't necessarily taste sweet to us, so you wouldn't assume that it has sugar in it. But man, food manufacturers add sugar to so many things now. So when you're looking at ingredients list, you're going to see things like fructose, high fructose corn syrup, glucose, invert sugar, corn sweetener, corn syrup, fruit juice concentrate, sucrose, honey. Even honey sparingly is okay to use as a sweetener, but it's still sugar. Lactose, maltose, raw sugar, brown sugar, molasses, all of these are sugars. And if you start looking at things like pasta sauce, like marinara sauce, you'll find sugar added into pasta sauce. Salsa, you'll see sugar put into salsa. I mean, you're kind of hard pressed nowadays to find a food label that they haven't added some kind of sugar. And it's kind of because it keeps us a little bit addicted to that food. So even though you wouldn't think you want some sugar in your marinara sauce, enjoy that marinara sauce whether we think it tastes sweet to us or not. So for example, like I was going through this ingredients list before, we're going to pull out those sugars. So brown sugar, dextrose, I'm just reading through here. Then you got good old real sugar, corn syrup, dextrose, high fructose corn syrup. All those are sugars. So all these are just different names for sugar. So a lot of times people will say, okay, well I can't have that much sugar anymore, but that's just hard for me. So what sweetener can I use? Some sweeteners include aspartame, like equal, saccharin. This is one you don't see a lot, Sunnet. I don't know if that's really common in our area. Y'all let me know if you've seen that one. I've not seen that one. Splenda got really popular for a while. That's sucralose. Sorbitol, xylitol, and mannitol, all those are sugar alcohols. You'll find those a lot in foods that are sugar-free, diabetic friendly. Those types of food are usually really heavy in sugar alcohols. And of themselves, they're not horrible for you, but if you eat them in abundance, sometimes you can have diarrhea. So just be careful with sugar alcohols and like sugar-free candies and, reduced sugar foods. The thing about sugar substitutes is, one, by the research, we have seen that people who don't eat sugar, they just eat some diet drinks. The study was on diet drinks versus regular drinks that have a lot of sugar, trying to reduce the sugar by drinking the diet version. Those people still had a 30% increased risk of diabetes, even though they were eating a sugar substitute. And it's not because it's calories, it's because of our body's chemistry. So keep that in mind. The only real sweetener that we condone, so to speak, is stevia. Stevia is made from a plant, so it's a plant-based sweetener. It's not a chemical sweetener. Like all of these are chemicals. Stevia is made from a plant. But even so, I would still eat it pretty sparingly. Stevia is a good option to help you kind of wean off real sugar. So if you're used to eating a lot of sweet tea, maybe you'll start using half real sugar when you make your tea, half stevia. And then, maybe the next time you make it, you might use 3/4 stevia and only 1/4 sugar. And then you might use all stevia. and then you might go to half the stevia, that kind of idea. So you can use it as a tool to help you detox a little bit from real sugar, but still over the long run, the best thing for you is still even to keep that kind of low. So salt, waste, we'll see salt show up in foods. An ingredients list is sodium chloride, sodium bicarb, disodium, sodium sulfite. So be wary of those. You can see they've highlighted 3 here. Salt, baking soda is sodium bicarb, so it has sodium in it. Sodium acid pyrophosphate, that's of course sodium. Anything that says sodium is going to be a lot of salt. So sometimes you'll see things saying sugar-free. That means it's an insignificant amount. And then you'll see low, so like low sugar. So it just kind of depends on the nutrient. Those standards are set by the FDA. I think so. Free means less than low. So low means a lot less of the nutrient. Free is going to be even less than low. And this is kind of outlining what low means. So low fat means 3 grams or less. Low sodium is 140 milligrams or less. Low calorie is 40 calories or less. Other label terms, really the one that I find the most interesting on this slide is reduced. Reduced means only 25% less. So something might say reduced sodium and say, you know, it was 400 milligrams of sodium in a food. If it says reduced sodium, it's still 300 milligrams. So it just has to be 25% less. So kind of be wary of any health claims on foods, because when they start putting health claims on there, they might be 100% on the up and up on whether that food's really the healthiest for you or not. So keeping your children busy, you probably do that. So in summary, try to plan out your menus, then make a good list, try to shop from a list, eat from the perimeter, all the processed foods and the impulse buys, and, you know, just keep working hard and doing your best and setting a new goal each week. So that presentation was really information heavy. I know it was a lot. So you guys take a few minutes, think about what your questions are, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.